So our first window on the right hand side is just a Kafka messaging system, which I use to pass the events between the components of the system. Next, I have my policy engine running in Docker, so I just have to start that. Next, I am going to create my policy from my policy model, and then I am going to start my policy engine. And that seems to be running. So now I have to start my application. So I'm going to run this application. This is going to send in my first intent to my policy engine. My policy engine is going to take the intent, generate an action for it, and then send it back to Mininet to generate a new network. Once it creates the network, it starts off a video stream to generate some traffic on the network, and it basically just will stream the video, and I will record the traffic, and the traffic I'll go through at the end of the demonstration to show that the intent is doing what it's supposed to do. So I've let the video stream run for a couple of seconds. Now I am going to send in my new intent. And my new intent is going to set the bandwidth restriction down from 1 megabyte per second to I think around 360 kilobytes per second. So we see the Apex engine has taken in the event, kicked it over to Mininet, and Mininet is now generating its new network, and it's started another stream. Giving that a couple of seconds to run just to generate some results for the end of the presentation. And then finally I am going to send in my final intent. Great. Okay, so my intent is running. So going through what is happening in policy, I can drag this across. So we have an event come into the system. We have our who, what, where, when, and how, the details of which are to the right of it. But then we identify that a bandwidth has been identified. It has identified the condition, so it's a less than a speed, kilobytes per second, which I'm actually looking at too early on of an event. Sorry for that. Okay, so we're going back to the first event here. So the first event was a 1 megabyte per second. It was identified and then sent into our intent album. When something new comes into the intent album, we have to trigger an intent validation. It's the only intent there, so it has nothing to conflict against. So we basically take our value, generate it into our Mininet parameter, and then kick it back over to Mininet, which I'll go through in the results. The second event comes in. The second event, 366 kilobytes per second. It has identified it and it has added it to the intent validation. Then, now because we have two intents running that are affecting the same attribute, we need to compare them. So we're updating our intent here. We're taking it down as a so we have our intent for 1,000. Our intent for 1,000 kilobytes is not less than the 366. So it has set it once, it doesn't need to change it anymore, and that ends our validation. Then we have our third intent come in. So our third intent bandwidth is 188 kilobytes per second. We've identified the condition that it must be less than, and we've added to the intent validation. Intent validation change means that we need to trigger a validation, the intent album change triggers a validation. So now we have to validate that all of the inputs are compliant, basically. So now with our intents, we have taken them all down, we have compared them, and we have generated that the they're all compatible, and that the lowest bandwidth that approves all of the previous intents is 188. We generate our mininet parameter, and then that's sent back to mininet. So I can close off everything here. And we should be able to find our data generated for the project here. So we are interested in this column. So when our policy starts off first, it hits 386, 632, 400, 600, 300. So it's bouncing around. It's not restricted in any way. Then the system goes down to reboot for our configuration, and then it comes back up, leveling off around 370, 371. Then we lost value here as the mininet was shutting down, and then we come back up at 191. So 190 seems to be the kilobyte per second, and then that runs the whole way through then until the end. So the intent is basically specifying the parameters for the network, and before it does this, it needs to validate that the intents are first of all coherent with each other, that they can all work, and then it basically plans on executing the intent that is best suited for everybody. That is